Hi, welcome to New Abbey NoHo. My name is Jess Garcia and I'm the worship pastor here. Today, in the question series, we are asking the question, what is prayer? So many of us have long histories with prayer, and all of us have different understandings of what prayer means to us. Join us for a conversation considering what prayer offers us and how it forms us. The question for today is, what does prayer mean to you? Take a moment, press pause, and when you're ready, press play and enjoy the message by our pastor, Darren McKenna.
So, anyone have a prayer request? Maybe an unspoken? Anyone have a prayer quilt lying around or a little prayer corner? So today we're talking about prayer, and we all come to this conversation from different backgrounds. And when I think about prayer, the first things that I think about are in my childhood are Sunday school classes, where at the end of the Sunday school class, we would all take turns writing our prayer requests on the board. And it was always awkward. No one wanted to write, and it was a little bit of forced vulnerability through prayer requests. That part was weird. But then also I remember back to college and the times where we did all-night prayer sessions or 24-hour prayer. And we would take shifts where we'd have a room that we rented on campus and we would pray, and somebody would have a shift praying at all times for 24 hours or a week or however long we were doing. And I also think of the times where I was just lying in bed and I was processing my fear, processing my future with God, just talking, right? All of these are very different ways of approaching prayer. And all of them are valid, right? And what I don't want to do today is invalidate anyone's experience of prayer. There are so many different ways of engaging in this discipline of prayer, and all of them are valid. Maybe there's a good conversation we should have, and I'm sure some of you will bring this up in your small groups about maybe what you pray for. Maybe there's a conversation about there are unhealthy things to pray for, right? If you're praying for power or domination or something along those lines, or the forced vulnerability aspects, maybe those parts aren't helpful. But the way we pray is very, very broad, and I really want it all to be validated, right? And so for some of you, maybe you have a prayer life right now. Maybe some of you, you've left that prayer life behind. Maybe for some of you, prayer is kind of a pain point. And so what I don't want to do in our conversation today is to put a to-do list item on your list, or I don't want to somehow make you feel like you're forced to engage in this practice. But I also do want to say I think this practice is helpful. So if there's any interest or there's any openness to it, my ask is that you would come along on this journey with us and think through what prayer might mean and offer to your life. And if you're not interested at all, that's totally okay. Maybe the benefit you'll have in this conversation is just hearing how other people are talking about prayer, so you can engage well with others who do have a prayer life, right? We always want to be able to understand how other people are engaging in the world and engaging with God and learn from their experiences. So however you come to this conversation and with whatever background you have, that's all okay. You see, prayer is a very, very, very old spiritual discipline. And we see it talked about all the time throughout the Bible, through the Hebrew Bible and through the New Testament. Jesus talked about prayer a lot. He taught on prayer and how one should pray, and even some of that content of like, don't go out in the streets and wailing and weeping or whatever to prove your holiness, right? Maybe just pray to God. Actually, use that time to talk to God. So Jesus found this to be very important. And what is also interesting to me is that science has found prayer to be very important. In recent years, they've done a lot of scientific studies looking at the effect that prayer and meditation have on the brain. And the results are honestly simply incredible, right? So what happens in prayer is that your prefrontal cortex tends to be activated. as well as your anterior cingulate cortex, which I'm very surprised I remember the name of that part of the brain in this moment. And the amygdala is actually a little less reactive. So what does all that mean? That's a lot of just like brain terminology. Well, focus and concentration is believed to happen in the prefrontal cortex, so it increases that and your capability for that. It also, the anterior cingulate cortex is responsible for compassion and empathy, right? And so prayer actually increases your capacity for compassion and empathy. The amygdala is the fear and anger kind of center of your brain, and prayer actually decreases the reactivity of the amygdala. These are all really incredible benefits just for this old spiritual discipline that we've been talked about to all of our lives if we've been raised in the church, right? In addition to that, prayer has some even like physical benefits. People who pray have reduced blood pressure, right? People who pray tend to be able to heal emotionally and physically faster, right? Their body is just primed because they're undergoing less stress. People who pray experience less stress and the associated releases that happen with stress. And there's a note here. It's that even people who don't believe in a deity, atheists, experience the same benefits of prayer, right? The idea of practicing prayer or meditation is not necessarily connected to deism or having any sort of God, right? So when they study Buddhist monks who don't believe in any deity but believe in that way of life as a part of their religious expression, the same things happen in their brains that happen in somebody in our context, whether that is a Baptist or a progressive Christian or whoever it might be, praying to God and engaging with the divine, a divine being. So this conversation is much bigger than the Christian church. And although we find ourselves in a Jesus-centered church, this idea of prayer and meditation being good for us is not only spiritually nourishing, but it's physically, mentally, and emotionally nourishing for all people at all times, right? Looking back at my life, and I look at these examples that I said earlier about prayer in my life, and I look at the time when we're writing up prayer requests at the end of Sunday school, and maybe the forced vulnerability with people that I may or may not have felt safe with wasn't the best or healthiest thing. But you know what might have been very healthy was a practice of every week thinking about the people in my life who need prayer, who might need some divine intervention, who might need some divine presence and love in their life. Did that increase my compassion? It probably did, right? And I look at the time where I'm in college and we're doing 24-hour prayer rooms or whatever the thing is, and I look at that and, okay, maybe the idea of spending 24 hours to pray that everybody would believe the exact same way that I did, maybe that was a little unhealthy. Maybe that's not what we should be praying for. But the idea that I was spending extended amounts of time in this prayerful, meditative state probably decreased my stress level and made me a healthier human in college. Or those times when I'm lying in bed and I'm afraid, or I'm thinking about the future and I'm talking to God and praying in that way. I'm looking at that and did that actually help me heal in moments where I really needed healing? You see, all of these past experiences of prayer that I may or may not really resonate with at this point in my spiritual journey, I believe they all formed me. I believe they've all made me to be the kind of person I am today. And I think that's what prayer has for us. And that's why I don't want to invalidate any way of praying. I want to expand our perspective of what prayer is, right? And I think this is really important. And I think a community like ours knows this. But I want to say it, that prayer isn't some sort of magic in a Harry Potter way, but maybe it is a kind of medicine for the world in need, right? It's a medicine. It helps us. It helps us become better humans. And it could actually provide a pathway for healing and transformation for all humanity. And that, my friends, is really, really good news. So what is prayer? What are the different ways of praying? Well, there's intercessory prayer where you're praying for somebody else. There's meditation. And for the record, cognitively, there's really no discernible difference in the brain between prayer, verbal prayer, and meditation for how it sits. Obviously, if you're praying with words, the verbal center is being activated. But as far as the benefits and the impacts on your brain and yourself, there's no discernible difference. So this meditative awareness is prayer. The contemplatives talk about being as prayer. Just your very life and being is an act of prayer in connection to the divine, because you are living into the life that God breathed into your lungs. That's always such a beautiful way of thinking of prayer for me. There are other ways of engaging in prayer as well. There's group prayer and doing this together and building that kind of community. There's communication and making requests and intention of God, right? And maybe that intention will lead to hope, which is a discipline in itself, as we've talked about in this community numerous times. And the way that I personally am experiencing prayer, I really want us to expand our view. So I want to tell you this is when I'm going on runs or when I'm working out. I experienced this for the first time a couple years ago when I was at a gym called Base Camp, and we would do 45-minute high-intensity interval training kind of classes, and I would just get into the zone. And after a little bit of getting that energy out of my body, I found myself very centered, and especially in a context like that where I didn't have to think about my workouts. They were telling me what to do. I was able to stay centered and meditative and kind of think about the world and think about my life and think about God and nourish the relationship between my body and between God and the world, and set an intention and have hope coming out of those sessions. And as I started running this year in 2021, I'm experiencing the same thing, that this meditative state that happens when I kind of get into my body a little bit and get some of that energy out, and the way it centers me and allows me to have hope and intention for the future. These are nourishing to my spiritual life. These are nourishing to my soul. And I really want that for our community, to experience that kind of nourishment. Scientifically speaking, they say the optimal amount of prayer per week, LOL, that we're talking about optimizing prayer. But what we've learned is that like 6 days a week for 25 to 30 minutes will provide the optimal amount of benefits. More than that, negligible benefits, right? And for a lot of us who believe in God, a lot of Christians, like not necessarily looking for the benefits. We're looking to connect with God and to build into that relationship, which is a huge part of why I pray. But it is helpful to know just kind of what is the landscape of how this impacts my life, and maybe what could be a goal. Maybe that could help you set a goal for what you want your life to look like. You see, prayer is something that can be exercised. It's like a muscle. It's not just this thing that you just pick up and do anytime. You actually have to kind of orient your brain in such a way that it knows how to pray. And so you could decide that you want to start praying, but I wouldn't start praying 6 times a week for 25 minutes, right? I would start with just whatever rhythm makes sense to you, whatever rhythm feels possible for you, and move forward with that. And as you go over time, as you're seeing how it works in your life and how it's impacting your life, how it's impacting your view of the divine and of the world around you, maybe you can increase and do a little bit more. But this isn't about a quota. I think when we get into this conversation, it would be easy to kind of go back to old ways of thinking and think like, I should just be praying all the time, or I have to kind of reach a certain amount of prayer per week to be right with God. And that's not the conversation. God is here. God is around us. Prayer is just becoming aware of that. And anytime you do that is an act of prayer, and it's beautiful. And anytime you pray is beautiful. It doesn't have to be a specific amount or anything. Everything belongs. All parts of yourself in your prayer life, in your spiritual journey. So what I want us to do, though, is to actually just take some time as a community to practice prayer. If it's not something you're interested in, that's fine. You can just tune out, I don't know, get on TikTok or turn on a YouTube video while we do this. Whatever feels right to you. But for those of us who are willing to go on this journey, I want to spend about 3 or 4 minutes in silence as a community and engaging in the practice of prayer. And that you can do that however you want. You can turn your camera off, you can keep it on, you can talk out loud, you can pray for somebody, you can meditate. I really think they all belong, and I don't want to dictate what your prayer life looks like. I want you to cultivate where a prayer life could look like for you. And so we're going to take a couple minutes and do that. And when we finish this practice, we're going to come back together as into our small groups, and we're going to answer the question, what kind of prayer life do you want, if you want one? And if you're able to say what kind of prayer life you want, what's one step you can take this week to move towards that prayer life? So let's begin a little bit of silence. We'll play some light music, and then we'll get into our small groups. Well, I hope that was a really helpful couple minutes for you. I really do hope it was fruitful and nourishing. Let's get back into our groups and ask each other, what do we want our prayer lives to look like, if anything? And if we have an idea of what we want it to look like, what's one step we can take this week to help us get there? So let's head into our groups before we come back into our larger group.
Thank you for joining us. Follow us on Instagram at New Abbey NoHo. And if you're interested in giving to New Abbey NoHo, feel free to head over to www.newabbey.org/generosity. Be sure to scroll down to the North Hollywood Fund. Thank you, and have a blessed week.